Tom, are you okay?
I lost her.
Her?
She was going to be this epic, trilogy-worthy character. I was going to be the hottest writer in Hollywood. But I can't get past Act 1!
You need some writers group therapy.
Hello and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers. Are you ready for your session? The doctors are in. And make sure you check us out online. We're writersgrouptherapy.com, also on Twitter and Instagram at WGTherapy. If you like what you hear, make sure you go to your favorite podcast platform and give us 5 stars. You can also find us online individually.
I'm Tom_Loveman on Twitter and Tom Loveman on Instagram.
And I'm at Roshni Lamino on Twitter and at Moonlily Music on Instagram. And today we are going to get a little bit meta because we have an interview with a podcaster, Robin Hu of Frantastic Stories, coming up later. So we thought it would be fun to talk about podcasting in general right now.
Yeah, we've been doing this for a little over 3 years now. And
Woo!
You've been doing this. I only have one podcast, but you have two.
Because I'm an
This
overachiever.
and Expat.
Thank you. Expattheshow.com.
Yeah. And every day it seems like I've seen a lot of notes from emails from like writing sources and stuff about doing your podcast, getting a podcast. And we get asked a lot about how do you do a podcast? And it's exploding. It's been, maybe it's because we're all home and we got nothing else to do. But I think this year it's 22% higher than last year. The number of Americans that listen to podcasts, it's like 62 million Americans listen to podcasts every week.
Spotify is becoming a major player in the podcasting scene, trying to overtake iTunes.
And Audible just announced they're going to be doing hosting podcasts as well. They just were audiobooks for, was their thing for the longest time.
Mm-hmm.
But now they're going to start hosting podcasts as well. I'm trying to think, was it in 2020, there were 30 million episodes of podcasts put online.
Wow.
And you might think that means you shouldn't do one because there's so many out there, but you got to think if 22% are listening to podcasts regularly, that means there's 78% are not yet. So there's a lot of market potential out there.
I will say on Twitter all the time, the top thing I see, and maybe it's just because I'm attuned to it, is, hey, does anybody have a podcast recommendation? And then like 50 million podcasters like spam the person with all of their links. So yeah. It's hard
to meet anybody these days, especially here in Hollywood, who doesn't have a podcast.
Seriously, right?
Yeah.
So before we go into the how you do it, let's talk about, first of all, the why and the format, because the most common thing is the talk show format, which is what we're doing. And that's definitely something where you can grab a lot of listeners quickly, but at the same time, today's news is yesterday's garbage. So you have to constantly be putting out new content, as opposed to something like Expat, which is a scripted comedy series. It's something that I just did it for one season and then like the half season with plans for the future. But I don't have to do it at a certain time. I don't have to put it out every week. It's evergreen. So I can always promote that versus with Writers Group Therapy, we promote an episode. We might go back and promote something from the past, but usually the news is done the very next day.
Right. And our podcast has changed over time because it originally started more as like a how to be a writer, how to write. A lot of those episodes are evergreen as well, but we got more into news and interviews. While the interviews are a little more evergreen than the news, we do have to watch when we're recording to make sure we're being timely because nobody wants to put out a podcast with old information.
Yeah. I mean, it all kind of works together, obviously, writing tips, but then you also got to sell your writing. So the business and the news and the how-to all works together. But yeah.
The great thing is we are allowed, because it's our show and we can do whatever we want. We can experiment and see what works and what doesn't and get feedback from our listeners on what they like. We've been doing something right. We've been doing it for so long. And you went ahead and started a second one. So
I must like torture. No, I'm just kidding.
You must like torture. Yeah, it does take some effort. We can get into how we do it. We record usually a week or so ahead of time before we're going to publish. We record using a website called Zencastr. It's like an online audio, like recording studio. And it's great because you can do it with people in different locations. Roshni's in the Valley. I'm in Hollywood. And while our equipment varies, we usually like to try to sound like we're in the same place, but we don't always. but that's the magic of it. And then you do the post production using, what do
Uh,
you use? GarageBand?
GarageBand, yeah. So nothing super fancy.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a Mac, it's pretty much free. If you've got, Audacity is a good tool. I use Adobe Audition because I have the Creative Cloud for my other stuff.
Twisted Wave and Reaper are also free, those are out there.
Hmm. I mean, you can just use QuickTime. You can record right into that. There's no editing in there, but you can record using a lot of different things. And then there's lots of free sound effects online if you want to add sound effects or music to your podcast. You just have to have a decent microphone. I'm using a gaming headset that was actually recommended by you. That was better than using my in computer microphone because we had problems with feedback, like, what do you call it? Bleed over,
Oh, Soundbleed, yeah.
sound bleed, yeah. And then you need a host, so you got to have a place to put your files to host them.
Okay, but before we get into the
Sure.
distribution part of it, let's go back to the, you know, you start at the basics of what is my show about? How often am I gonna do it? How long is this show gonna be? One of my favorite shows is Side Hustle School. He's gotten a little bit longer, but his original format was 5 minutes. Basically, you get in there, you brush your teeth, and you're done. Like something to listen to while you make breakfast or brush your teeth or like, start your car in the morning. And I love that because they were bite sized. But then there's other shows out there, for example, like a D&D podcast, which is like 3 hours long. So you really have to think about who your audience is, what your format is, how long, because do you really want to edit a 3 hour, plus program every week?
Seriously, yeah.
You have to decide those things up front. A news talk show like what we're doing is a lot easier because this is all improv. It's all off the cuff. But if you're doing something scripted, then maybe you have to, write out the scripts. You have to plan the topics in advance, get your interviews. And the stuff that we recommended, that's like the dirt cheap, entry level stuff. Nowadays with podcasting, I would say, especially if you're doing something scripted, you want the best possible equipment that you can afford. And you want high quality, they call it digital audio workstation, DAW. You want the highest quality DAW that you can use, not necessarily Pro Tools, but maybe you want to, get something that you pay for, like Logic or something. Get a sound engineer because it is competitive and they won't listen if the audio is bad. And that's actually all you have to give them in this space is audio. So give them really good audio.
Right. I mean, we always say in film, you have to have good audio. Your picture can be good or okay as long as your audio is good, because people who hear something weird will turn it off. Versus if the picture flickers a little bit or the picture's not perfect, it's not a killer.
Mhm.
It's even more important in podcasting. Cool.
Okay, so now let's talk distribution.
So yeah, well, and it's important, what you said about how long is your podcast going to be, how often are you going to do it? That's really important for when you're considering hosting. There's a lot of free hosts out there, but they have limits on how much content you can upload based on either file size or length, and how much bandwidth you use, how many people are listening. So you have to. Most people don't really measure the bandwidth anymore, but some people do. But so you've got to watch out for those metrics when you're shopping for a host. The host is where your files sit, and then what happens is it's distributed from your host to the different platforms. So you don't send your actual podcast to iTunes and to Spotify and to Stitcher and all these other things. You just send it. You just put it on your host, and then you use what's called an RSS feed, which is stands for really simple syndication. It's a link that just automatically sends your new episodes from your host to all the platforms automatically every time you put a new episode up. So the host is really important. And if you're starting out and you're not going to have a huge audience and you're going to be doing it, every week or every 2 weeks, and your episodes are, half hour, you can probably go with a free host to start with. Things you're going to want to look for though are stats. You want to have good stats from your host so you can understand your audience and how many listens you're getting. And you want to be able to, if you're going to wind up growing and wanting to be able to do things like advertising and stuff, you want to look into hosts that have those features. You get into that stuff, it's going to start to cost a little bit, a monthly fee. But if you have enough audience and you have advertisers, it should offset the cost and
I
hopefully eventually exceed it.
I will say though, to correct what you said, you can actually distribute it yourself. It's just a little bit trickier. I actually looked into it with Expat. You can do it by yourself and not go through one of the hosting services if you wanna do it for free. It's a little bit more complex. But
That's right. You could do a WordPress website. It's a blog website that actually has functionality that will work on some hosts as a podcast host. So you can host it yourself. You're right.
it's just I don't know. I think
There's more
going
technical
through a
issues.
hosting service
Yeah.
is easier, but yeah, you can do it yourself if you really want to.
Well, when you get into the marketing side of it, you're going to want to have either a website of your own, or some hosts actually provide you with a landing page that you can use as your quote unquote website. So that's another factor there. If your host, I guess there's like podcast hosts that do the whole thing, the website and the hosting. But at the end, you're still going to be syndicating to all the platforms anyway.
Mhm. So let's talk pros and cons, because right now, in fact, this topic came up because I sent Tom a link to an article, I think it was from Screencraft, that was like, "Now's the best time to write your podcast," and I was like, "Oh boy, here we go. Everyone's gonna do it." And what's funny is, there's definitely pros and cons. We've discussed this before. I mean, I think we discussed this even a year ago when I was launching Expat. It's cheap, it's really easy to get into, it's faster than editing a film, but now if everybody's gonna do it.
Yeah, it's always the same question of who's going to listen to you? How are they going to get your podcast, into their ears? So if there's right now 30 million episodes out there, how is your episode going to get to the right people? If you're doing a narrative podcast, for example, and you're trying to find an agent, or you want to sell the project as a film later, how do you get that in front of the right people? Marketing.
Well, I mean, of course, marketing with anything. I'm just talking about the space being saturated. It's kind of like when people were talking about, say, YouTube in the beginning, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you gotta get on YouTube." It's one of those things, by the time you hear about it, you might already have missed the curve to join, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's that possibility. It depends on your niche. The great thing about podcasting is there's always some sort of niche market you can go. If your subject matter is so very specific, there's going to be an audience for it. And then you have to you have to do some research and find out where that audience is so that you can find them. For example, I did a lot of research into Facebook groups that have to do with screenwriting. So every week when or every time we publish an episode, I always share it to those Facebook groups. We get a lot of views from those, or listens, I guess you would call it. I also found a couple groups on Reddit, for screenwriting. So, and that's kind of a little further out there. People don't not everyone spends a lot of time on Reddit, but when we have a podcast that makes sense there. They had a Cobra Kai Reddit subreddit
Mhm.
that I was able to post our interview with Susan Gallagher, who was an actress on Cobra Kai. So you have to be really niche when you're thinking about marketing, because the audiences are there and they're large audiences, but you have to find them.
Definitely do your research first before you start, I would say.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of even YouTube shows that kind of start off with no real focus or purpose. Like, I'm just going to start a show, and they really haven't defined it. So nobody knows what to look for, because doesn't have a real good theme to it. It doesn't have a good basis to like say, this person's just getting on there and talking. If you want to do that, you can go on Twitch.
I mean, I think right now is a good time to do it, but because the market is okay, so one thing that was in the article was, "Oh, this is how Hollywood's discovering people." What was ironic to me about that article, I've seen something as far back as, like, I think it was, like, 2013 or 2015 saying, "Oh, podcasts are the new place for Hollywood to discover things," just like how Twitter was where they found what was that, Things My Dad Says, and I think, Dear White People was also, from a Twitter feed. So just like Twitter used to be like a breeding ground for that, podcasting has been recognized as that at least 7 or more years ago. It's just now it's coming to the forefront because we're all stuck at home and it's the safest way of creating. So it's not necessarily it's funny because I thought that article was ironic where it's like, "Oh my gosh, it's new." It's not new. It's just more people are jumping on the bandwagon. Bigger names are also jumping on the bandwagon, which is why I think you need to do your research and be very smart about how you market yourself and how you write your content, because now you are going up against bigger players. One thing Tom and I discussed off podcast this is actually also a great time if you are able to safely shoot your short film, because TV and film is gonna run out of content. Visual stuff is running out of content. The audio world is not. Do something where you can tie them in together, and then you have an audience in both spaces. But I think you'll see, give it like 6 months, the audio world, or I'm sorry, not the audio world, the visual world is going to freak out going, "Oh my gosh, we need content." So this is the time when you wanna create for that, and then maybe tie a podcast in. That would just be my recommendation.
No, it makes good sense. We had Joe Frank, the literary agent, on a while back, and he mentioned that podcasts are a great place for him to find stuff because he's really busy. But when he's exercising or when he's driving around, he can listen to stuff, but he can't read scripts while he's doing,
Mhm.
some of those things. Or maybe he just doesn't want to read; he just wants to have something piped into his ear. So it's a good way to, get a sample of material quickly, and it's a little more, it's produced than reading a script. So you kind of get a better feel for it, I guess. So yeah, so there's definitely people out there looking for content because of the upcoming kind of lag we're going to have. Like the whole TV seasons are being pushed into next year now. I think some shows are going to start in October maybe, but a lot of them aren't even going to start till like January. So there's in
Stuff
that
keeps getting pushed back,
piece, yeah,
even finished stuff.
and production's trying to start up again, but it seems like they start and then they stop,
Yeah,
and so some of it's been delayed more. So it's a kind of a wild west out there, I guess. But if you're making content, that people can find accessible, then there's an audience for it right now, both professionally and as a just audience.
definitely. So how about you, Tom? What creative endeavors are you gonna do in the podcast space besides writers group therapy?
Well, I was working on a narrative podcast. I've presented pages of it to our writers group several times, and I kind of picked a tough subject, so it's really something I've kind of set aside for a while. But I'm thinking of doing one of my other feature films as a like an audio. I guess I call it more like an audio book. I don't think it's a podcast necessarily, unless I decide to break it up into chapters. But I have something I'd like to put out there. So
Oh, that's
so
cool.
yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot.
Very cool.
Do you have any new ones on the horizon, or are you still just crunching on expat?
I did, Expat Season 1 and then the 1.5, which is the minisodes, and then I went and wrote a novel, which totally is unrelated, and so I need to get back into Season 2 of Expat, but part of it too is I just haven't decided. I had Season 2 scripted out, like, just an outline, but I need to decide if I want to still have them in quarantine time or move the timeline up, and it's like, "Oh, and everything's fine."
Yeah, that's a tricky thing.
Yeah.
Uh, I suppose you would want to. I would. My feeling would be to make this kind of timeless because I don't know that you actually dated anything in it.
There's 2 episodes that are related to quarantine, but they're really minor. They're
Ah,
just minisodes.
yeah. I would kind of just kind of minimize that actually.
So, like, this is now 3
Yeah.
years later and we have a vaccine. Woo!
Yay! I wish life were like that. When we could just
Right?
fast forward
Just
through all
press the
this.
fast forward button.
Yeah. And you're going to be on another podcast being interviewed
Yes.
about expat, right?
Yes. Actually, our upcoming guest, Robin Hu, featured me on her podcast, Frantastic Stories. So, this is a perfect time to get to meet both of us, I guess. Me on her show
Yeah.
and her on ours.
Cool.
And joining us today is Robin Hu with Frantastic Stories. It's a podcast it's kind of like Moth Radio, I think would be the best way to describe it. It's just stories and slices of life from people all over the world. It's a very interesting podcast, and it just launched like mid-pandemic in the spring. So, welcome, Robin.
Hey guys, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Yay, we're so glad you're
Welcome. Yeah.
here. So, tell us a little bit about Frantastic Stories, how it got started, and I understand it also morphed. So, how it morphed as well.
Yeah, so as you said, it started in the mid-pandemic. I think I was just like, okay, I need to do it. I'm gonna do it now, with that a little bit extra time that the pandemic gave me, I guess. The well, the idea started actually a year ago. The idea. I wanted to. I've been writing for a while. I've been doing some content with different fictional characters, and I thought, you know what? Why not giving a voice to this character? And I also love acting. I did theater when I was younger, so I thought, you know what? There's not much else going on, so may as well try and give it a voice and do some narration. And podcasting has become quite huge, so I thought, why not in a form of podcast, something different, right? And so I started with episodes on Jane, one of the first characters that came to life with the podcast. Jane is like a traveler, so a lot of the stories have to do with traveling, with growth, so different kind of journeys. And then yeah, after some episodes on that, I started connecting more with people also in the podcast world. And I found so many amazing, great guests that were happy to be on the show and share their story. Because this is what, Fantastic Stories is about sharing and giving voice to people around the world. And so I decided to go with the flow. And yeah, now it's this section, the season one is called Alive. And that's basically the part with all the interviews and amazing guests we have.
That's really interesting. Before we get into more of the content, I'm kind of interested in from a, I guess, a business perspective. We've changed formats a little bit here and there. Yours seems to be a pretty drastic format. Did you get a lot of feedback from your listeners on going from the kind of narrative side to the interview side?
Yeah, so the funny thing is that it is quite a drastic change. And I will also it's a mix, right? So I think the people who listen, and from what I could get from their feedback, is that they kind of are just interested in the story aspect of it, which is kind of that common denominator, whether it's me telling a story and sharing it under fictional characters, or it's actual guests telling the story. I think that there's a lot of common topics. It's a lot about journeys, personal journeys, journeys around the world. So the topics don't change, it's more the format. And it seems that the listeners are enjoying both, which is great. I'm really happy about it.
Yeah, it's great if you can be flexible and do different things and still maintain your audience and kind of, guess, keep it fresh too.
Yeah, and with the interviews, I think it got even more interesting, right? Like there's a lot of great content coming in there, so I think it was beneficial. And but yeah, as you said, it was risky. I just went with the flow. I don't know, sometimes I just don't think, I just do.
So I'm curious because I know you're in Canada. What is the writing scene and the creative scene like out where you are?
Ooh, Ottawa. I think Ottawa per se does have quite a, yeah, I guess a strong community. Basically, I kind of joined a writer community through Meetup. It's not. I feel it's not as big or as strong as cities like Toronto or Montreal, where just by default there's more of it. I think here a lot of the people I see writing, they're not necessarily the fiction I write. They're more, whether well, in the articles, so journalists, actual journalists, or they are more into like fantasy kind of genre. So different genre than what I write, but it's there's still a community, few but strong.
I guess we should say what genre are you writing in? Maybe we should have started with that question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, yeah.
It's all good. No, it's our fault.
um yeah, well, it's the funny thing is, I'm really bad with that, because I just say it's narrative, it's fiction narrative, it's not young adult, so it's not, it's the audience is 20 to 35. And yeah, just narrative, based on real life, but it's all like fictional characters.
Kind of like I'm trying to think like Jane Picoult or Or more historical, or oh, Judy Picoult, Jodi Picoult. I can't even remember her name, but you know what I'm talking about, like that kind of like bestseller fiction, general kind of stuff. Or are you thinking more like historical? Or I'm just trying to pinpoint.
Yeah, no, not well. That's the thing. So because Jane is in the present and Henrietta, the other character, is in the past. So depending on the character, so Henrietta is a character from the past, and it's based in the World War II times. So it has some historical aspect, but Jane is in the present, traveling the world we live in. So yeah, that's why I'm like, I never know how to say it exactly, because it's not historical fiction, not all of it. So yeah.
Do you have plans on weaving your fiction back in with the real life stories in Fantastic Stories, or are you just going to stick with the interview format for now, or who knows?
No, so the plan is to finish off this season. So I divided, there's this like kind of launching season with the fictional stories, and then season 1 being the one with the interviews. I have a bunch of more episodes coming up of people I've interviewed. So once I publish all of those, I will go back to the writing part of it. So I will have a couple more stories coming from the writing part of it. So
Yeah,
it will change.
yeah, doing the all the interviews takes a lot of time, and it takes you away from being creative, doesn't it? It's hard to balance the two.
Yeah, yeah, that's why I'm learning on the way, right? So what I decided to do, and this is kind of why I haven't mixed it, is I wanted to be, the writing is one section, and then the interviews will be all together, because as you said, Tom, like, it does take time, and I want to give it a section that is exactly like from other people, and then go back to the writing. So it's alternating. It's a little bit, whatever people had taste of, if they prefer the narrative, if they prefer interviews, they're gonna get a little bit of both.
When you're looking for people to interview, what are you kind of looking for? What kind of stories do you look for? Where do you find them too?
Ooh, I find them on mainly like podcast kind of platforms, where people, podcasters can connect. And what I look for is simply, so a lot of people have those stories. The idea started with the fact that I miss traveling. And when you're traveling and you just, I don't know, you're sitting in the lobby of a hostel, you're on the train, someone sits next to you, and sometimes you have this great amazing conversation with strangers, basically, that become less of a stranger by the end of the conversation, and it's very enlightening. And so many people have a crazy, interesting story of themselves, of things they've seen, things they've lived. And so what I look for, and it's funny enough, a lot of times it's the people who find me. So I've been pretty lucky to have found the right people, as well as people just coming up, and I'm like, yes, you're totally a fit for this. It's people who, some of them have very, very strong, how can I put it, very strong, challenging past. They've went through something very, very big in their life, and so they overcame that, and now they dedicate their lives to helping others overcoming similar challenges. And then others, so more of like a personal growth, personal journey, but from health to well-being, to um whatever that would be. And then on the other hand is people who are just explorer. They just love traveling, so they've been around. They can kind of like, they're interested in whatever is social and cultural about this world, right? And they come in with their stories, whether they're funny or just kind of like travel stories that they have, and they like to share. So I think again, there, what is the common denominator, whether it's a personal journey they went through, or it's more of a, just that explorer spirit, and following that spirit, is anything, a lot of like the topics and a lot of the stories have to do with how our society, how our world works, as well as what is, yeah, what is something that can help people be happier.
What's your favorite or the most memorable story that you've interviewed someone and you heard and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to put this on the show?
Well, it's hard to tell because there is a couple, and I don't want to spoil the next episode, but there's there's
Spoiler
one.
alert. Listen to the next episode, guys.
Exactly, because you'll recognize a voice for sure. So yeah, besides a couple of travel stories, like this one story where the person ended up needing an oxygen oxygen tank and so on, just in the most at the most random time as well. So definitely that is one of the top like funny stories um that I'm really excited to share. But the other one, I think, so there was one guy who lives in LA. His name is David, and I thought like his story.
Oh, David. I know David. No, just kidding.
Yeah, he's over there where you guys are. No, actually he's in Seattle. But yeah, David, he shared a story, and I think like the interesting part of it is also, it goes back to the 80s. But his journey was very his growth journey was on so many levels. Like his career in acting, trying to follow his dream while living in, back then, even if it was Canada, he's originally Canadian, back then living in a time where his sexuality was not approved. So it's kind of that challenges that he went, and it was not just the personal journey he went through, but also a little bit the history of our society. Certain things is said, I was just like, oh my god, I can't believe this is Canada, I can't believe this is you know um Seattle, LA, like it. Yeah, it was just very, very mind-blowing. But yeah, I just talked to a lot of people who managed to overcome even like illnesses, and it's just insane. Like I think one of the biggest takeaway I had to talk to some of those people is well, I have two takeaways from until now, and it's basically making that conscious decision to pursue your happiness and understand what makes you happy, and understand how you can get to that happiness. And then the second is the great, great connection between mind and body. I find this two being very interesting takeaways.
That's very cool, and we should all be very aware of that. In this, we're so isolated and locked down and everything. It's your mental and physical health are so combined right now, and you really need to keep an eye on that. Once this is over, once we're able to travel again, what's your first place you want to go visit that you've kind of discovered through your podcasting?
Well, I recently talked to a girl who's in Vietnam, and it made me feel. I was in Vietnam before, but I feel like there's never enough time to see a country properly. So that lately, like I had the buzz of like Southeast Asia. But being in Canada, and having to skip probably the U.S. I would say U.S. for the national parks, but if that wouldn't be possible, I think I want to go to Mexico. I really I've also been a lot into tacos lately, so I don't know if that's making me decide for that. But yeah, Mexico, I haven't been there yet. I've been to some places in Central America, but I've always postponed Mexico because I feel it's a little bit bigger, I need more time. So yeah, I think Mexico would be it.
That's awesome. So before I run off to go eat tacos, Robin, how can people find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are on Twitter under Frantastic Who, on Instagram, Frantastic_stories, and our website, or at least where you can find some of the, links for the episodes for the podcast, it's www.frantasticstories.com.
And just so people know, it's not just your accent. It is actually Fran, like Fran, and it's not fantastic. It's Frantastic.
Awesome.
Correct.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Robin.
Thank you guys for having me. It was lovely to chat with you.
Yay! Go check out her podcast, guys, Frantastic Stories. And I believe, besides Robin, you'll hear another familiar voice in an upcoming episode. So make sure you definitely check it out.